Greetings everybody, it's me Rob from Sage Tower Games, and today I'm bringing you guys a Pathfinder 2nd edition video talking about DCs. So let's get into it right away. What is a DC? Well, a DC is a difficulty check. It is a certain number that you usually have to try and beat, either by you making an attack or the enemy having to make a roll to kind of save from your attacks. Whenever you hear make a reflex save, it's against a certain DC. Or whenever you have to make a save and so forth. Or if you're trying to make an athletics check, for instance, it's a DC. So in 2nd edition, they kind of changed some of the stuff here. For instance, anybody who dives into 2nd edition, you'll see words like make a check against the target's fortitude DC, or the target must make or against their will DC, or their athletics DC. If it says some sort of like ability or type of save DC, what they mean by that is it is 10 plus whatever that number is. So if it's a reflex DC and they have a +9 to their reflex, that means that their reflex DC is a 19. Same like if they have a +12 to their athletics, the DC for athletics would be a 22, and so forth. This is something that can be easily overlooked. When I first started playing 2nd edition, I was like, I see it says fortitude DC, but what does that mean? I was a bit confused. Now, this is an interesting way to do DCs, because it means that as creatures level up, as their stats get better, the DCs get harder. They kind of go up in line. A lot of times I felt like in some of 1E, even sometimes in Starfinder, skills would kind of get to the point where where either side could just blow out DCs no problem. I had games in Pathfinder 1E where people had these super high checks and they just couldn't fail, basically. This might make it a little bit harder for them to kind of auto succeed on these checks. So just having the DC scale a lot better with the levels not only helps DC checks, it helps deal with the issue of bloat. I know it came up a bit in one of my other videos, the worry of, well, as they get their level added to their proficiency, then does it make it so that at high levels, they're getting a +15 to their check plus whatever their stat is, and now they're rolling +20, +25. But if you look at the chart that I mentioned previously, I'll pop the chart up on the screen again for you guys. This chart kind of lists the DCs by level, and you can see, for instance, in my example, that a level 15 DC is about a 34. Now, they also include on these charts adjustments. Either maybe it's a bit uncommon, maybe it's a bit of a harder check, so do you give it a +2 or a +5? Or maybe vice versa, it's the other way. Maybe it's a bit easier than a level 15 check. Maybe it's something favorable to that player. So maybe give them a -2 or -5 to the actual DC modifier. This gives the GMs a lot more control over adjusting DCs on the fly and making it so it's still not, so that you don't adjust too much in one direction. I've done something similar when I used to play 1E or Starfinder, when there was a creature that they were trying to identify, and it was something that was really rare, not something that makes sense for them to kind of actually adjust or actually learn about. I would raise the DC about 5 at least. So similar notion, but now it's actually in the book, which is really good that they kind of laid it out there for you guys. This is what the DCs is. Speaking of DCs, one important thing for people to note, and I want you guys, listen to me. This is an important feature for you guys to know. Armor class is considered a DC. Now I know it may not you may think for a second, well, wait a minute, it's AC, it's not DC. Technically, if you realistically think about it, your armor class is essentially the DC for an attack roll. Now you may be saying, alright, so it makes, whatever, it's another number. Here's the thing. In this game, I've talked about it in the past, conditions being a big part of Pathfinder 2nd edition. There are many conditions that say they have a penalty to all your dexterity-based DCs, or a penalty to all your DCs. If it has a penalty to all your DCs, for instance, frightened, that's a -1 to your AC. Penalty to your dexterity-based DCs, that's a penalty to your AC. So right there, you have various conditions that can affect AC and help you in battle. Frightened, by the way, is kind of done by when you intimidate someone. So you can see that intimidate kind of has this way to work, and it's easily overlooked because, again, it doesn't say AC in the actual description for frightened. It just says all skill checks and DCs, which means armor class. So keep that in mind. It's an important thing that can be easily overlooked for newer players. Alright? Now, the last thing I kind of want to bring up before we kind of do an overview about this is flat checks. Now, this technically isn't a DC, but in a way, it's an interesting change that they did to the system. A flat check is basically you roll a d20, and whatever you roll has to beat a certain number. For instance, if you're dazzled, you gotta beat a 5. If you are bleeding, you gotta beat a 15, and so forth. I'm not gonna talk about like death and recovery. That deserves its own video because that's all the different rules with that. So what this does, this replaces the old school percentile dice. Back in the day, I say back in the day like it's been so long, right? But it hasn't. You would have to roll, concealment would be like 20% mischance. And then total concealment would be 50%. Alright. Anybody who's played with percentile dice knows the issue right away. What is considered 20%? Is it 1 to 20? Is it 80 to 100? I think every time I've had to roll percentile dice, I've had someone ask me, go, well, is it low or high that counts? And obviously you decide, you kind of let people know before you roll it how it goes. But it's a bit uncertain, And again, like percentile dice is always one of those things that you never ever have to use those dice, except for those few moments. So get rid of all that, makes it simpler. It's a lot easier for someone who's trying to learn Pathfinder or learn tabletop. Just roll a d20, 1 to 20, simple number. Instead of going, well, okay, I'm gonna roll my percentile die and my d10, and then that number plus that number is if there's a 0 on that one and 0 it's 100. It's like, no, you're gonna lose people like that. Clean it up, make it nice and simple. And flat checks, I feel like, are another big thing that they've done to change the game. It's helped it. Again, I say big, even though it's a very small and simple change, but the effects of just making the game easier. And in fairness, most of what I've described isn't revolutionary. DCs have been around all for forever. The concept of what they are has been around forever. So what's the difference? Now we have like proper charts kind of giving you ways to adjust it on the fly, easy ways to handle adjustments, easy ways to calculate DCs. All this, by the way, is on the GM screen. So for those of you that are GMing, either get an actual screen, download the PDF, whatever, print it out if you have to, you know, get the charts. It helps a lot. But by streamlining the DCs, streamlining black checks, making it easier to understand, and then combine that with all the other changes that they made, like we mentioned in our last video about the action system, making the action system a lot simpler. You can see what they're trying to do here. They are trying to make 2E more welcoming. And that was a big issue that they had from 1E. 1E was just too crunchy, too many numbers for people who like. People would be like, well, why would I play this when I could just play 5E, which is a lot simpler? I want to play Pathfinder. It has cool options, but the numbers are just like, oh my god. So a lot, maybe people drifted more towards D&D. But they made a slight change with Starfinder, as you know, those of you that have played Starfinder know. And then they stepped it up now with 2nd edition. So it's a pretty good change. Well, tell me guys, what do you guys think about the DCs, black checks, these small adjustments that kind of help change and make the game easier to run? It's just, I feel like it's a nice change. It's nice to see a game that I don't have to go, you know, okay, it's this plus 8 or this, and with the DC is like a 15, but they, you know, players rolling a plus 12 already, so it just makes it a lot simpler. So with that, thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos on the channel, and check me out on YouTube, Twitch, or Facebook at Sage Tower Games. Same for all three. And with that, I'll see you guys next time.